I'm the president of HMA Public Relations in Phoenix. We do not handle candidates. We are an apolitical firm. I will be the moderator this evening. First off, we'd like to acknowledge the East Valley Chambers of Commerce Alliance, representing the Apache Junction, Chandler-Gilbert, Mesa, Queen Creek, Scottsdale, and Tempe Chambers of Commerce. This organization has been in existence since 1997 and is the largest business organization in the state. It works in conjunction with the Durham Policy Group. On state and federal issues impacting businesses. We have some elected officials in the audience tonight. We could please ask them to stand. Give them a round of applause. Our format for this evening: the order of responses to all questions have been predetermined through a random drawing. Our introduction question will allow each candidate to have 2 minutes to respond. And we'll get to that a little bit more in depth in just a moment. At this time, we would like to thank Walmart for donating the water and the cookies for this evening, if you had a chance to enjoy those in the reception area prior. And I'd like to introduce Linda Lujan, who's the president of the Chandler-Gilbert Community College, for a few words. And we'd also like to thank them publicly for supporting this event. Dr. Lujan.
Thank you, and good evening. Oh, I can feel the energy from here. On behalf of the faculty and the staff of the college, I welcome you to Chandler-Gilbert. We are very excited to host tonight's forum for this very, very, very important election, and I know that's why you are here as well. Dr. Rufus Glasper, my boss and the chancellor for the Maricopa County Community College District, was hoping to be here tonight, but other duties called him, so on his behalf, I extend his welcome to you as well. By design, Arizona's public education system has 3 strands: our K-12 system, our community college districts, and our 3 fine state universities. Every one of those 3 strands is critically important to Arizona and to the students who are coming through those systems. We all work together to prepare students, our future, to be civic-minded, to be engaged at the local and the state and even the national level, to attain jobs and careers that will benefit their families and this state. And we all do a great job of preparing those students in those 3 areas. We are proud to represent, and we are proud to host you here this evening on behalf of the many, many students served by the Community College District, by the state universities, and by our K-12 system. Some of our students are here tonight, either in the audience or as ushers. Can you join me in thanking them for their civic engagement? Also here tonight is the president of the Maricopa Community College District Governing Board, Mr. Dana Sarr. I think I saw him out there somewhere. Dana, can you? Tonight you're at Chandler-Gilbert, but I want to remind you that we are but one of 10 colleges in the largest community college district in this state and in this country. In fact, we think the world. We serve more students than most of the university systems in this country, and we do that year over year. When you work with one of us, you work with all of us. I like to call it the power of 10. We are a nationally known community college district, and we're probably one of Arizona's best kept secrets. So do us a favor and share that information with your friends, with your neighbors. We are the largest provider of workforce training in the state of Arizona, and annually we bring in more than $3 billion in economic benefit both to Maricopa County and to our state. Sounds like I'm running for office, doesn't it? But I never miss an opportunity to plug a wonderful community college district. And on behalf of our district, on behalf of the faculty, the staff, and the students here at the college, we are thrilled to host tonight's event. Also in the audience and in the dark are the many, many people here at the college who help make our work possible and who help make tonight possible as well. We'd also like to thank the East Valley Chambers for their support and partnership, long-standing and enduring, for all of the work that we do with them, but especially for bringing tonight to Chandler-Gilbert. By state law, I cannot officially endorse any of the candidates. So publicly, I can go in the voting booth. So on behalf of the college, I wish every candidate the very best of luck, and may the best man or woman win. Thank you for being here.
At this time, we'd like to introduce the candidates who will be debating this evening. First, Ken Bennett. Frank Riggs. Scott Smith. Andrew Thomas. All right, our format for this evening, the order of response to all questions have been predetermined through a random drawing. Our introduction question will allow each candidate to have 2 minutes to respond. All of the questions after our introduction question will provide each candidate the opportunity to be the first to respond. Time to be allocated as follows. 2 minutes for the first speaker, 1 minute rebuttal from all other candidates, and 1 minute final word from the original speaker. And again, I would ask all candidates, please do pay attention to the time, as we will try to adhere to that as closely as we can. We will be closing with all candidates. They will receive 2 minutes at the podium here to make closing remarks. Again, the order has been predetermined through a random drawing. Jeff Mirasola from CenturyLink is our timer this evening. He is seated right here in front and center. Candidates, there he is with his signage. He will show you a 30-second sign and a 15-second sign, followed by the stop sign. All right, so let's begin. Our first question will be answered in alphabetical order. So, Mr. Bennett, why are you running for governor, and what distinguishes you from the other candidates? You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Scott. Whoa. Thank you for coming this evening. It's good to be with you. I guess to answer that question and then maybe introduce a little bit about myself, if you remember 2 things about Ken Bennett, or 2 words, it's one thing, it's experience matters. I'm a native Arizonan, 5th generation. I spent most of my life in the Prescott area, although I was born in Tucson when my parents were attending the University of Arizona. But Prescott was my mother's family's hometown. We had gas stations and eventually sold gasoline, diesel at the wholesale level. Grandma and Grandpa's phone number in Prescott was 49. So we've been in the Prescott area for a long time. But my great-grandfather was an early settler here in Gilbert. I guess we're in Chandler, but not far away. Great-grandparents down in the Douglas area. So we've been all over Arizona. I love Arizona. The reason I'm running for governor is to help make Arizona better tomorrow than it was yesterday. And that's what I've done in both the private sector and the public sector. I mentioned experience matters. I spent about 30 years in the private sector. For about 24 years, ran our family's fuel business up in the Prescott area. And then for the last 6 years, since I've been living here in the Phoenix area as Secretary of State, I've been on the board of directors for the Cancer Treatment Center of America Hospital out in the Goodyear area. But during that same 30 years, I've also spent 25 years in public service. I started as a Prescott City Council person and did that for 4 years. That was very helpful to understand how local government works. I later served on the State Board of Education, 8 years in the legislature, 4 years as president of the Senate, and then the last 5.5 years as Secretary of State. That legislative experience is very important because the last time the state budget was really balanced without accounting tricks and gimmicks or temporary tax increases was back in 2006 and 7. Jim Wires was the Speaker of the House, I was President of the Senate, and we worked hard. That says 30 seconds again, but I bet you wanted the end one. Oh, no, okay. I was going to take it if you're going to get me. I think my time's up. We'll talk about the things. Thank you for being here today. Thanks.
Why are you running for governor, and what distinguishes you from the other candidates? 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you so much for moderating, and to President Levant, thank you for hosting, and to the timer, we've done a lot of these, so just go with it. We'll take whatever signs you give us. I'm Christine Jones. I'm a Republican candidate for governor. And as a person who had the great good fortune to join this tiny little startup technology company with a crazy name, GoDaddy, when we had just a few dozen employees and having grown it to about 4,000, most of them right here in Arizona, I'm running for governor because I understand the need to have leadership that understands economic development and how to create jobs from the private sector standpoint. And as a person who, like most of you, started from a very humble background and had an excellent public school education, I understand the need for every single child in Arizona to have that same opportunity. For me, I was able to attain some level of success by becoming a CPA and a lawyer and working really hard, but I think every child should have that same opportunity. And then as a person now who's traveled around the state for about 40,000 miles, all 15 counties, and met all of these incredible people in Arizona, I'm running for governor because I think what I suspected all along is true, that this outside conservative message really resonates with people here. That if we could just acknowledge challenges for what they are, statewide issues that require cooperation and leadership to solve, we could really get something done. That's why I'm running for governor. What distinguishes me from the other gentlemen on the panel, all of whom I have respect for, is, well, the obvious. And then, I think importantly, I've never been in office before. I've never run for office. I don't owe anybody anything. And at this point, I'm just enthusiastic and excited to be able to come to this with untethered ideas. Because together we really could make Arizona, among the grand galaxy of states, the brightest star in the union. I look forward to your questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Mr. Riggs, why are you running for governor and what distinguishes you from the other candidates?
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to be with you. I especially appreciate the fact that we're here at a community college because I appreciate the vital mission of community colleges as part of our K-20 education system, but especially their focus on career-related education and training, and especially for the 70% of our young people who will not complete college. I'm Frank Riggs, and I'm running for governor because I want to use my experience to help our state address the very real challenges that we face and make our state a model for the rest of the country of constitutionally limited government, a state where free markets work, a state that prizes personal initiative and personal responsibility. I'm a proud Army veteran. I'm the only veteran running for governor. Served in the Army as a military policeman, military police investigator, military police supervisor, and out of the Army, went to college, got my degree on the GI Bill, became a police officer, later a deputy sheriff, and in the process met my wife-to-be, Kathy, a trailblazing female police officer, native daughter, born in Tucson, and even though I swore I'd never date a female police officer, we've been blessed with 3 beautiful children, now all married, and 3 absolutely wonderful grandchildren with our latest arrival, Savannah Elizabeth Riggs, last week. So I'm going to lead the efforts to secure our border, enforce the law from the front because I have that experience. I'm also, I really think at heart, a serial entrepreneur. I built 2 successful real estate and outdoor advertising businesses from the ground up. I know what it's like to sign both sides of the paycheck, meet payroll with your heart in your throat. And I'm a former United States Congressman, the only candidate for governor who has served in the highest legislative body in our land at a time when we balanced the federal budget, fundamentally reformed welfare, and at a time when my voting record earned me the Guardian of Small Business Award from the National Federation of Independent Businesses for my pro-jobs, pro-growth voting record. I look forward to your questions tonight.
Mr. Smith, why are you running for governor and what distinguishes you from the other candidates?
Thank you, Scott. And thank you so much for hosting us here today here at the Chandler-Gilbert Community College. And first of all, it's not really fair that Frank can use the new grandchild trump card. He listed in oohs and ahs. I love puppy dogs. I love that. Not the same. Not the same. I am so grateful. I'm a fourth generation Arizona, and unlike most of you, I was born in Arizona. Most of you, it's not a hard thing to say, we came from somewhere else. I have Arizona in my blood. You chose this great state, but we both ended up in the same place, loving a state that has so many opportunities and so many great things. I was born in Tucson, raised in Tucson. My father was in education. He was a school superintendent, first down at Floyd School District in Tucson, and we moved up to Mesa where he became superintendent of schools in in Mesa when I was in junior high, and so I've lived in Mesa ever since then. Got a chance to go to school, get a bachelor's in accounting from BYU, where I met my wife for 36 years. Yes, now you can feel sorry for her. 36 years, and 3 wonderful children and 5 even more wonderful grandchildren. After a career as CPA and with an MBA and went back and got a law degree, I went into consulting and worked with Price Waterhouse. I got into business as a small business with the idea that perhaps I could grow into a big business, and that's what we did. We grew this business from one with 10 employees up to, in a few short years, one with 300 employees and almost $200 million in revenue. I know what it's like to take a small business, make it a large business. And after I sold that, I had the great privilege of being elected mayor of Mesa. And what makes me different and why I'm running for governor is I saw what principled conservative government and common sense decision-making, bringing people together to make it more about me than about me, that we can make a real difference. And if there's one thing that you remember out of this entire night, I want you to know that I believe that the best days of Arizona are ahead of us. And I hope we come out of this with the common knowledge that even though we have great challenges, we also have great opportunities. Thank you.
Mr. Thomas, why are you running for governor, and what distinguishes you from the other candidates? 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, and good evening. And I, alas, am not able to cite the grandchild trump card yet, but I do have a child going to community college. How about that? Yeah, exactly. We all have our trump cards. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak tonight. We have an important election coming up, and while we have a host of issues that are important, I will share with you what I share with every audience, because I believe there needs to be special focus on an issue that dwarfs the rest. If we do not secure our border, and if we do not stop illegal immigration, well, we can talk about other issues, and they are important, admittedly: education, healthcare, jobs, the economy, etc. If we do not deal with that very real threat to our future in Arizona, our days will be darker. That is a reality. We are facing economic challenges. We are facing challenges to our budget. And those are simply facts. They are facts that are inconvenient to many people, but I will not let those facts be ignored, because it must be addressed. Our border must be secured. We must stop illegal immigration. If we don't, we will go broke. We will go the way of other states that are on the way to a Detroit-style bankruptcy. And that is simply an economic and fiscal fact. When I was in office, I said originally, when I ran 10 years ago for Maricopa County Attorney, I would stop illegal immigration. I put that slogan on my signs. And there was a lot of skepticism, but we did. For a period of time, illegal immigration was, we had stopped illegal immigration. Illegal immigrants were leaving the state, and now that is no longer the case. That may sound like a harsh recipe, but it is necessary. And that is at the heart of why I am running. I look forward to speaking tonight on this and other issues, but that is the issue that dwarfs all others, because if we do not deal with that issue, we will go broke, and we will not have the bright future that we deserve. Thank you.
Now we are into the random order selection of answers for our candidates. Question number 2. If elected, what are your top 2 state priorities and why? Mr. Thomas, you have 2 minutes. The rest of you will have 1 minute.
Well, maybe I should let people guess. I'm just kidding. And I don't want to repeat myself, but to sincerely address the question, that is at the top. And I'll elaborate briefly, and then we'll go to another issue. It is not to be mean-spirited. It is not to unfairly insult people. It is simply a fact. We have a border with a foreign country, and many people who live there want to live here. And unfortunately, when they come here, our courts, which are very liberal, have held that they are entitled to public benefits at our expense, a free public school education and other benefits. We cannot feed and clothe the world. And that may sound harsh, but it is a fact. There are limits to our generosity. And so that, and for other reasons, that's why that's at the top of the list. Education is a very important issue as well. I have 4 children. There are various stages of education. Education is obviously key for economic and personal advancement and betterment. It's important that we have schools, public schools that are strong, safe, and orderly. We also need to have, in my opinion, charter schools and strong private schools as well as a supplement. Our system of higher education, I have spoken out about, and I don't back off those efforts, and I think that has special relevance to everyone here tonight. A majority of college graduates in the United States cannot get a full-time job in their area of study. We are not matching our college students with real jobs in the real world. They deserve better, their families deserve better, and we need to start speaking honestly about this problem. I've discussed it at some length in the campaign, and I'll continue to, and you all deserve answers. You deserve answers as students, as faculty, as parents and grandparents, people going to college, as I am. And I will continue to make that an important part of my campaign and my administration as governor.
Ms. Jones, if elected, what are your two top state priorities and why? You have 1 minute.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there's a lot of things we can focus on, and we have an opportunity to really make a profound difference here in water and energy and forest management and the environment and lots of things. But probably the top two have to be the symbiotic relationship between economic development and education. Because if we are to create all these great jobs, we have to have a pipeline of talent to fill them. That's one. And then the second is we've got to get the border secure, because it has profound implications on the economy and education and homeland security and citizenship and so many other things. And it's really important that we distinguish between immigration policy on the one hand and border security on the other. Immigration policy is to the federal government to address. Border security we can and should do something about as a state, so that as governor we provide a stable, secure, safe environment for every single citizen that lives in Arizona.
Thank you, Ms. Jones. Mr. Smith, if elected, what are your top two state priorities and why?
The two state priorities for me are jobs, 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 and jobs. Wait, that was 4. But that has to be done in the context of what I faced when I came in to be mayor of Mason. That is, our state is facing a financial crisis. This financial crisis is endemic, is systemic, and by 2016 or 17, we'll be facing a structural deficit. And this was before the court ruling of a week or so ago on schools and the shortfall in that. The second one is how we work that in conjunction with creating an economic opportunity and economic elevation for everyone. You cannot separate economic opportunity from educational opportunity, so everything stems from that. The question is, what can we do to solve these problems and these challenges with limited resources? How do we expand those resources, take most advantage of the assets we have, reprioritize, and understand what we need to do to invest to create the kind of return that will increase economic opportunity for all and excellent education for every child in Arizona.
If elected, what are your two top state priorities and why?
Well, I actually have 4, because the governor has to be able to do more than 2 things at once, has to be able to multitask. But the first responsibility of the state government is public health and safety, just as national security is the first responsibility of the federal government. So because of my military and civilian law enforcement experience, I will lead a coordinated federal, state, local response to secure the Tucson sector of our border. I'm also a former school board president. I was the chairman of the House of Representatives Education Subcommittee. I built the largest nonprofit organization in the country dedicated to helping charter schools with their capital and facility needs. And I will focus on K-12 education, make sure every Arizona student has access to high-quality public education. But I'm also cognizant that our state faces very real fiscal challenges. We have a budget, a projected structural budget deficit that has to be addressed honestly and truthfully and with transparency. And we've got to get our economy going again, because we're mired in a tepid economic recovery, and that means incentivizing the private sector, especially small businesses, which constitute 95% of all Arizona businesses, to be able to form capital and create jobs.
Thank you, Mr. Ritter. Mr. Bennett, if elected, what are your top two state priorities and why?
I believe the top two state priorities are jobs and education. Of the $9 billion that we spend each year out of the state's general fund, about $4 billion goes to our K-12 school system. Another $1 billion goes to our higher education system. Now, there's other local monies that come into that, there's federal monies. If you look at all of the monies that we spend at the state level, state, local, federal, we spend about $30 billion a year. But about $10 billion goes into our K-12 school system. About $4.5 to $5 billion goes into our higher education system. So education is very important. In fact, I think it's one of the 4 aspects of how we need to grow our economy and get our jobs growing again in Arizona. The best thing we can do for a young person is to get them a quality education that allows them to get the high-quality jobs either here or wherever they choose to go in the world. The other thing we need to do is grow our economy by lowering the cost of doing business in Arizona, attracting companies here and keeping companies here so that Arizonans have the jobs they need to provide for their children and grandchildren.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Mr. Thomas, you have 1 minute to summarize this question. If elected, what are your top 2 state priorities and why?
Well, maybe we can go on to other subjects, but to reiterate, the bottom line is, if we don't address some of these issues, we are going to face some very severe challenges. The budget is another one, but the reality is we now have a ruling from a court that puts us behind the 8 ball fiscally in dealing with our budget because of what has been ruled as funding that has not been put into our public school education that the voters mandated. I think that needs to be played out. We need to see what the courts ultimately rule. But I do believe that when the voters vote, even if, whether or not I agree with a particular outcome of a ballot measure, when the voters vote, the politicians need to salute and enforce their will and implement their will. And if that wasn't done in this case, we're going to end up having a giant budget hole that we're going to have to deal with, and we're going to need somebody who will be tough in dealing with that. I put forward a welfare reform plan that will help to free up quite a bit of savings, and I think that's important as we go forward and try to deal with not only that, but the other budgetary challenges we face.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Our third question this evening, what changes would you propose to the K-12 education funding system, and how would you keep our education budget in line while continuing to improve our education system? Again, this is a random order. 2 minutes, Mr. Bennett, you are first.
There were 2 questions there, Scott. Would you repeat the second one? One was what changes to the funding system?
How would you keep our education budget in line while continuing to improve our education system?
Okay. One of the things that we need to do very desperately to help support our K-12 funding system is to restructure our tax policy so that the revenues coming to the state's general fund flow with the economy instead of spiking high in good economic times and then falling off a cliff in the bad economic times. As I mentioned, the last time the state budget was balanced was in 2006 and 7. Jim Wires was the Speaker of the House, I was President of the Senate. At that time, $9.5 billion was coming into the general fund and $9.5 billion was going out. 3 years later, after the economy had taken about a 10% dip, the revenue of the state's general fund had dropped by 1/3, from $9.5 billion to $6.5 billion. So obviously our tax system is way too volatile to the economic upswings and downswings. When the economy dips by 10%, the revenue coming to the state's general fund should dip by about 10%. Now when we had spending balanced at $9.5 billion, we had over $1 billion in the state's rainy day fund and other reserve accounts. If our tax system flowed with the economy, instead of spiking high in the good years and way low in the bad years, when the economy dipped by about 10%, the $9.5 billion coming into the general fund should have dropped to about 8.5%, or $8.5 billion, not to $6.5 billion. Because when it did, education especially took a huge hit, and we started doing all kinds of accounting tricks and gimmicks, borrowing money and delaying payments. The 7th largest item in the state budget today is the debt service on debts that we have accumulated over the last several years. Almost $388 million a year just in debt service payments.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Mr. Rick, what changes would you propose to the K-12 education funding system, and how would you keep our education budget in line while continuing to improve our education system? 1 minute.
First of all, I want you to know I'm making a commitment here tonight, as I do everywhere I go on the campaign trail, and that is I will use the executive authority of the governor's office to repeal Arizona's participation in Common Core on day one. And the reason for that is that Common Core constitutes an unfunded federal mandate imposed on the state government, and by state government in turn, on every district and charter school in the state. Common Core standards should be strictly voluntary. And in fact, if you look at the two-page memorandum of agreement that committed Arizona to Common Core, the agreement between Arizona and the feds, it says these standards are intended to be strictly voluntary. Secondly, the Arizona Association of School Business Officials says that Common Core will cost over $350 million to implement. And that's frankly money that we don't have to spend, or if we're going to spend on K-12 education, we should focus on those most difficult to educate segments of the student population, which have created the achievement gap because they're performing below peer and grade level. This is too short a time to deal with such a complex question.
Thank you, sir.
But, all right, I'll come back to it.
Mr. Smith, you are next. What changes would you propose to the K-12 education funding system, and how would you keep our education budget in line while continuing to improve our education system? You have 1 minute.
Well, there's two things. Number one, and 1 minute isn't enough to talk about this. Our system that we currently use to fund K-12 and formula area were really decided by court case 30 plus years ago. The world has changed in that time. This is before charter schools, this is before all that, and basically the system is outdated and does not fit our needs. As governor, I would have no problem rolling into the political minefield that it is one to completely review our funding of our K-12, which includes how we fund our basic traditional public schools, how we fund our public charter schools, and the relationship between the two. One of the things we need to do is to expand the resource base. And we can expand the resource base by using the assets that we have, and that is by expanding our use of the state land trust. We have a land trust that is meant primarily to fund K-12 education. It's the primary beneficiary. It's expanded from $1.5 billion to over $4 billion in value, and yet we have legal and constitutional limitations and other things that keep us from really realizing the true benefits of the hundreds of millions of dollars that are embedded in that we could use to help, that we can help to fund our K-12 education.
Thank you, sir. What changes would you propose to the K-12 education funding system, and how would you keep our education budget in line while continuing to improve our education system?
Well, again, we have a court ruling that's going to need to be played out before we really know the playing field and fiscally what the state is on the hook for. So that looms over all these discussions, and obviously that's going to determine what we end up putting into our public education system. And if the public schools have been stiffed, frankly, against the voters' will, then that's going to need to be addressed. Well, let me just get to a few related issues. I'm absolutely against Common Core, and I came out early and often about that and continue to stand firmly on that issue. I believe that we need to have strong charter schools, and we need to have strong school choice as well for people who choose to go that route. That is a strength of Arizona. We have a very strong charter school system in Arizona. It works well. That needs to be maintained. And again, well, we're not getting into higher education right now, but we do need to do, I think, a better job of having vocational and technical training in our high schools. I think that makes a lot more sense and needs to be more widely available to young people as they decide what to do with their future.
Thank you. What changes would you propose to the K-12 education funding system, and how would you keep our education budget in line while continuing to improve our education system?
Couple of things. The first thing we have to do is we have to get more money into the classroom. At the moment, we get about 54 cents on the dollar into the classroom. The national average is about 62. The school districts who do it really well, like Chandler, get about 61.5 cents. So we got to get that number, close that gap a little bit. We have a very complex education spending formula. If you've ever looked at it, it is about 75 steps to go from $1 of appropriation out to the spend. We can simplify that a little bit. It's complicated by the fact that there are some federal mandates and some voter-approved mandates here in Arizona that limit the changes that we can make. But as a CPA, I have spent a ridiculously, maybe unhealthy amount of time analyzing this thing, and I do think there are some improvements we can make. And then I think we have to say, what are you going to do to keep the education budget in line while you improve education? We have to be honest about state trust lands and getting more money into education. We also have to say it's not just about more money, it's about how you spend. Efficiency across the 227 school districts would go a long way. Economies of scale would go a long way to helping us spend not more, but better. Thanks.
Thank you.
Just a couple more thoughts on how to keep the education budget in line. During the 4 years we were in the Senate and I was president, we put more new money into K-12 education during those 4 years than any other time in the history of the state. Now most of that, about half of that, was to fully fund the student formulas for population and inflation. But the other half, we made sure went into the classroom and not into administration. Could not agree more. We've got to get more of our resources into the classroom where it benefits the teacher and teacher assistants and others who are directly dealing with students. I offered what I called then, and will offer again now if elected governor, what I call priority-based budgeting. In budgeting the entire state budget, one of our first priorities has to be education. And we did so during a time when we had a divided government during my 4 years as Senate President. We brought people together, Republicans and Democrats, and we got more new money into K-12 education during that time than any other time in the history of the state. We can do it if we make it a priority. And then once the money is in the system, that needs to be prioritized into the classroom first.
Thank you. Our next question this evening: the state will continue to have significant budget challenges as it weighs revenue against desired programs. If elected, how will you approach the budget and what will your priorities be? Mr. Riggs, you're first. You have 2 minutes.
Let me just add to the discussion about K-12 education, by the way, because it ties in with the budget, which is we've had to pledge future lottery revenues, which is supposed to be a dedicated funding stream for K-12 education, to help balance the state budget. We've had to resort to some extraordinary measures, long-term borrowing long, to pay for short-term operating costs and balance the state budget, as the state legislature and governor are constitutionally mandated to do. Here's what I want to do. I want to scrub our tax code. I want to get rid of all the special interest tax loopholes that riddle our state tax code and cause it to be called a miniature version of the federal tax code. I want to move us towards true tax reform, true tax simplification. And again, I'm very cognizant that small business people are too busy and don't have the means to employ lobbyists and aren't down at the state capitol. And those special interest loopholes that are in the tax code, that's corporate welfare, nothing more or less. So we'll get rid of all that. This is the time to do it. We have a true crisis, which gives us the opportunity to fundamentally reform our state tax code. One thing I do want to do, I want to create an incentive for every business in the state, regardless of size, to be able to fully and instantly expense all of their investment expenses in the same year when those investments are made. I want to offer that incentive to every single Arizona business because frankly, one reason, I think the principal reason, for our very tepid economic recovery during the recession has been basically the business investment has lagged. So here's an incentive that would tell every business owner in the state of Arizona, you're going to be able to fully write off against your state income tax liability the full amount of investment expenses that you make in that tax year. And if you don't have sufficient tax liability to offset those investment expenses, you're able to carry them forward until you can fully write them off. You're not stuck, you're not tied to some sort of long-term amortization or depreciation schedule.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas, if elected, how will you approach the budget and what will your priorities be? 1 minute.
Well, I won't give you my previous spiel, but obviously border security and securing the border has to be top because that's what so much else depends on. I put forward a plan that involves putting National Guardsmen on the border, that involves building a border fence. I urge you to read it at voteandrewthomas.com. Public safety, which is related to that, but is distinct, is also a very important matter. And I think it's the fundamental duty of government to make sure that decent, law-abiding people can live their lives in peace and security from criminals. And that is fundamentally why we have government. We must not lose sight of that fact. Crime is starting to go back up in Arizona, and it's gone up dramatically compared to other states. Compared to when I was in office, we helped drive down crime rates, and I'm very proud of that fact. We need to do a better job of getting bad people off the streets and locking them up, and if that costs more money, we need to be willing to pay for that. Finally, education obviously is a huge issue. We've talked about that before, and I'm almost out of time, but those are some of the key budgetary components that I would be focusing on.
Thank you. Mr. Owens, if elected, how will you approach the budget and what would your priorities be? 1 minute.
I approach all budgets as a CPA, and I look at both sides of the income statement, the revenue side and the expense side. We have a tendency as government to look only at the expense side. That's sometimes a mistake. The second thing is there are technology solutions begging to be implemented in this state. The state hasn't really done an overhaul of the technology for about 25 years, and there are some pretty significant low-hanging fruit efficiencies that we can pick up to save money. But I really believe that economic development is the key to the ongoing growth of our state. We should be streamlining the tax code, removing regulatory barriers and statutory barriers to entry for small businesses and entrepreneurs who are in this state, who are devoted to being here and are to stay here. And then we have to go outside of the state and to the companies who would be relocating or moving or expanding anyway, sit down with those CEOs and say, let me tell you why Arizona is your wisest choice. Because job creation is the single best tool we have to increasing revenue, because more jobs leads to more taxpayers, which leads to lower taxes for everybody. Increase the revenue, you can pay for your expenses.
How will you approach the budget and what would your priorities be?
Well, I'll approach the budget the way I did for 4 years as Senate President and 4 years as a state senator before that. And the main thing, I'll go back to that little phrase that I used earlier, priority-based budgeting. To me, you have to identify what your priorities are. Public safety is, of course, one of those. Education is one. Investing in things that will help to grow our economy is another. If we had equated the tax system so that it flowed with the economy a few years ago, then it would have dipped slightly like the economy did, and would have come back to a level now that we would have about an extra $1 billion a year coming into the state's general fund. And just think what we could do with those. That $1 billion. You're never going to have as much as you'd like. And in our agency, the Secretary of State's office, during the downturn and the budget cuts that were significant, we had about a 25% cut in our budget. And yet, we prioritized the services and made sure that we kept good people, we cross-trained, and we have improved our turnaround times by about in half. During the same time, we lost about 25% of our budget. So you can prioritize and still give services for less money.
Thank you. Mr. Elected, how will you approach the budget and what would your priorities be?
I'll approach it the same way I did when I was elected mayor of Mesa. 3 weeks after I took office, I was hit with the exciting news that we were facing a $62 million budget shortfall because revenues had fallen off the ledge. That was about 20% of our general fund. And what we did is we pulled upon our experience as a professional, as a CPA, and as 30 years in business. We said, we're going to approach this like I would in the real world, because this is a real world situation. In the city, you can't use smoke and mirrors. And so we spent 3 months innovating, getting creative, and we got results. We decided not just to sit out the recession, but we did prioritize. We did things like Mesa's police department took huge cuts in Mesa hit a 40-year low in major crime, violent crime. We had nearly a 20% decrease in personal property crime, and Mesa was named by FBI statistics one of the 3 safest big cities in America. You can prioritize, you can become more efficient, you can become more innovative. As a matter of fact, the Arizona Republic named my city as the most creative and innovative city in the state because we approached the budget situation as an opportunity as well as a real crisis, and we managed through it, and we made things better.
Well, tax reform and tax simplification, or tax fairness, as I prefer to put it, will help us broaden our revenue base and enable state government to meet its fundamental responsibilities of public safety, K-20 education, and indigent health care for the truly needy and the desperately poor. I want to see a flat tax on income above 100% of the federal poverty level. I think tax policy should encourage savings and investment, tax consumption. It empowers the taxpayer in terms of how they spend their tax dollars through their consumption decisions. I also want to be very honest with you about one other thing that we absolutely have to do, and that is we have to roll back the unsustainable expansion of Medicaid under Obamacare. We as a state have more Obamacare enrollees under the age of 18, that is to say minor-dependent children, than any other state. The Heritage Foundation says that state taxpayer contributions to Medicaid will be $2.8 billion between now and the year 2022. It's not that far off. So I want to roll back Medicaid eligibility back to 100% of federal poverty for those childless adults who are working age and able-bodied.
Thank you. As we move on to our next question, I would like to remind the candidates, when you see the stop sign, please stop. What tax reforms do you believe will have the most positive impact on business growth and expansion? Assuming the state has the authority to make these changes, what will you do to champion these tax reforms? Mr. Smith, you're first on this. You have 2 minutes.
From an overall standpoint, our tax liability actually is not that significantly higher than other states. That's the reality. Now, the fact of the matter is that we have taken a piecemeal approach to tax policy and to tax reform. We tend to take an issue here this year, an issue here the next year. And what we need to do is we need to look at the overall tax system. There's no doubt we can be more simple. We can have a more simplified system. There's no doubt that we can take away many of the targets that really don't accomplish what we need to accomplish. But the fact of the matter is that having a simplified tax system, having a tax system that is deemed to be fair, and I do not support eliminating the state income tax because I simply don't believe that we have a rational and reasonable replacement for that would not unduly shift burden to other taxpayers and would actually not cause a significant decrease and be counterproductive and go against what we truly want to accomplish. As governor, I want to take a complete review of the entire tax system. Our corporate taxes, our property taxes, which from a personal standpoint are actually fairly reasonable, but as a business standpoint, they're way out of whack. I will look at further simplifying our transaction privilege tax and finding a real solution to the construction tax that we tried last year, but the solution simply wasn't there because it wasn't completely thought out. It can be taken care of. There are other things that I actually agree with Frank. I would support credits and others that encourage capital investment. We've seen that I don't like using tax to accomplish social policies. I do like it when we can encourage investment, especially capital investment. And these are things we need to look at because historically, going back to the time that John F. Kennedy, yes, the Democrat, put in the investment tax credit back in the early 60s, those are things that actually have had real results in spurring investment and in creating jobs. And that is our #1 issue. We have to create a system that is deemed to be competitive and fair so that we can entice investment. It's private investment that will move this economy forward, not the government. It's private investment, and the tax system that we have must encourage that kind of investment, especially in capital items.
Thank you. Ms. Jones, what tax reforms do you believe will have the most positive impact on business growth and expansion? Assuming the state has the authority to make these changes, what will you do to champion these tax reforms?
Couple of things. The first thing is we have to simplify the tax code, particularly for small businesses. As I've traveled around and asked people, what would it take for you to create a job? Most small business owners say the same thing I would have said if you asked me when we had a few dozen employees at GoDaddy. Just get out of our way. Stop making me file $0 tax returns in all 90 cities around the state where I don't do business. And stop making me file the same permit for my business when nothing has changed. So that streamlining piece, particularly for small businesses, is important. The personal property tax for small businesses is extremely burdensome and something we should be focused on. That's 2. The third thing is we really have to say we're going to be transparent and have accountability in our taxation so that you know what you're paying every single time. The tax code right now is unnecessarily complicated. We do have a very low and fair corporate tax rate, but you wouldn't know it to look at it because it's difficult to figure out how much your tax is. So to summarize, simplify, focus on small businesses, and transparency and accountability. To champion it, you have to be the state's cheerleader. You have to be the evangelist, and you have to go spread the celebration of what's happening at school.
Thank you. What tax reforms do you believe will have the most positive impact on business growth and expansion? Assuming the state has the authority to make these changes, what will you do to champion these tax reforms?
Scott, first of all, would you reassure the audience that I did not see the questions in advance? I already talked about instant full expensing, and I saw a lot of heads nodding out there from entrepreneurs, business owners, risk takers, job creators, and I believe that is a phenomenal incentive to be able to offer every single Arizona business. I talked about moving towards a broad-based consumption tax. I want to just elaborate on that for a moment, because again, I think tax policy, government tax policy should encourage savings and investment, It should tax consumption. That gets at the underground economy, and let's face it, we have a large one in our state. It also makes our out-of-state visitors and seasonal guests pay their fair share for government services and the use of government infrastructure. So I want to move that direction with an exception for prescription medicine and a low-income rebate up to, again, 100% of the federal poverty level. Lastly, Medicaid. I want to roll it back, as I said, for able-bodied working-age childless adults, in part because it also takes, according to the Congressional Budget Office, Obamacare takes $1 trillion out of Medicare, a retirement health insurance program, over the next decade.
Thank you. What tax reforms do you believe will have the most positive impact on business growth and expansion? And assuming the state has the authority to make these changes, what will you do to champion these tax reforms?
Well, several of the ones that have already been mentioned, I would look at as well, but I believe Arizona needs to be the 10th state to eliminate the state income tax and replace it with a low-rate, broad-based consumption tax. Now, it's already been mentioned that some don't believe that can happen, but 9 other states do it. About 3 years ago, right here in Chandler, I was at an economic development forum. I was explaining the state budget, as some of you have seen me do it with my Kleenex boxes, and the next speaker talked about how one of the economic development organizations in Maricopa County that tries to get companies to come to Arizona was targeting 300 companies that had left California just that year. But despite all of their efforts, only one of them could they get to come to Arizona. When asked by the audience where they went, he started naming about 8 or 9 states, 6 of which are states that do not have a state income tax. We can eliminate the state income tax. I would not support raising property taxes, but I would replace it with a low-rate, broad-based consumption tax, and Frank was already talking about some of the benefits of that.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas, what tax reforms do you believe will have the most positive impact on business growth and expansion? Assuming the state has the authority to make these changes, what will you do to champion these tax reforms?
Well, I start with the premise that first we should do no harm. We do not need tax increases in the state of Arizona, so let's at least hold the line there. I believe we need tax relief in the area of personal individual income taxes. I think that is where the tax relief needs to be focused, because that is the engine that drives our economy, and that historically has been the case at the federal level, and I believe that we need to have that focus at the state level. I think we should look at child tax credits here for young families who are struggling. That they are some of the people who are struggling the most in our economy to get by. I think that that's another area of emphasis. And we need to keep our tax and regulatory system very competitive compared to other states. When we're trying to entice people and businesses to move here, we need to have a tax and regulatory system and policies that are very competitive so that we can compete with states like Texas, and so we can continue to draw in business from places like California.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, you have 1 minute to summarize.
During the campaign, it's always easy and nice to have eliminate your taxes and increase services. That makes no applause for doing that? Yeah, well, okay. Let me tell you, 6 years as mayor, I talked to a lot of people who were in companies who were looking to invest in Arizona, looking to move to Arizona. I can tell you I did not have one company that ever said, I'm not thinking of coming to Arizona because your taxes are too high. Now, our tax system needs simplification. Our tax system needs tweaking. But the reality is our overall tax burden is not significantly higher than our competitive states. We have different pockets where the allocation is wrong, and we can do a better job. But to say that if we simply reduce our taxes, companies will come here is simply not the case. Companies go to places where they can succeed, and cost is one factor. The main reason most of those companies overflew us and went to other states is primarily the perception of our education system and the fact that they believe they cannot attract a high enough quality people to succeed. That is where we need to focus our efforts. We need to look at our tax system, but we have to recognize the real reason why people invest and why they overlook our state.
Thank you. Our next question this evening. Arizona's transportation infrastructure is struggling to meet current and future demand. What factor would you consider in evaluating proposals to accelerate infrastructure development? Our first candidate, Christine Jones. 2 minutes, please.
What factor would we consider in increasing transportation?
Evaluating proposals to accelerate infrastructure development.
Well, I think the answer to that goes back to economic development, and clearly the key to the ongoing growth of the state. transportation infrastructure has been somewhat neglected, partly because when Governor Brewer took over, the state was in a very significant financial crisis, and she, along with the legislature, have had to navigate through a really tough time, and I think credit where credit's due on that. Now that we are where we are, we could say, if we could look into the future and where do we want to be in 4 years or 8 years or whatever that event horizon is, what transportation system do we need? That should be the most critical factor. Then, importantly, how are we going to pay for it? Because at the moment, we've just spent the last half an hour talking about the fact that the state doesn't have enough money, even barely to meet the current revenue or the current expense that we have. I think if you take a look at what happens with transportation, you build a road, you service an area, it is a way to focus on job creation. There are private-public partnerships that we can put in place today to finance some of these important transportation infrastructure needs. And it's not just roads, actually. It is in rail, and it is in air, and it is in roads. So if you drive around the state for 40,000 miles, you will find something that I've found, and that is the following. You're going to lose a kidney because some of the roads need to be fixed. The reason for that is because the legislature has had to sweep all of the transportation funds into the general fund. We've got to get those monies back to the local areas, back to the cities and towns who are actually maintaining current roads before they fall apart. Because if you can't maintain the ones you have, and we're at real danger of this right now, friends, you can't build new ones. So get those HERF funds back out, do the public-private partnerships to build new roads, and then say, what are the projects that you want to, focus on and get there.
Thank you. What factor would you consider in evaluating proposals to accelerate infrastructure development? You have 1 minute, sir.
Infrastructure is something I know well. Of course, as president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, dealing with the Department of Transportation, and prior to running for governor, running a foundation whose sole purpose was to develop statewide transportation plans and needs. And I can tell you that we are sitting on a ticking time bomb. Our failure to invest in our infrastructure is a price and a cost which will come due. It's not something we can delay, and the cost will be much higher and much more painful when we have to pay for broken roads, broken bridges, broken sewers. And the other thing is we're foregoing great economic opportunity. We recognize, as mayor, that investing in roads and freeways and interchanges created economic development and economic prosperity because it spurred investment. We have to look at all the tools that are available to us, whether it be a TIF, whether it be looking at separate funding, whether it be, once again, we have to revise our state land trust, which, believe it or not, do have a direct impact on our ability to develop infrastructure. All of those things need to be on the table, including increased public-private partnerships, but we have to decide we want infrastructure to be a major emphasis for us.
What factor would you consider in evaluating proposals to accelerate infrastructure development? 1 minute.
The first proposal I will evaluate is that the state has got to quit taking money from the local cities and towns and counties to try to balance the state's budget. Because I served on a local city council years before, when I found myself in the legislature, that was one of the first things that I worked hard to get rid of, was those fund sweeps and transfers, taking money from the local governments to help balance the state's budget. We eliminated those fund sweeps and transfers. Not only did that, but we put almost $350 million into a permanent fund to accelerate transportation projects. So the first thing you do is you balance your budget with your own money and quit taking money from the local cities and towns, as we've done over the last 5 or 6 years. To help balance the state's budget during the economic downturn, the state has swept about $800 million of funds from cities and towns and counties that should have gone to them to maintain those local infrastructures. Once we live on our own budget, then we can also work on creating some funds to accelerate transportation and infrastructure projects.
Thank you. Mr. Thomas, what factor would you consider in evaluating proposals to accelerate infrastructure development? 1 minute.
Well, this isn't the most glamorous of topics until you're stuck in traffic, right? Then it makes then the point is driven home. Obviously, we need to make sure that our freeway infrastructure, both in Phoenix and Tucson areas, is strong and can support continuing economic growth. One thing that is a passion of mine, and it has become clear as I've driven around the state, is we need to invest more in our rural highways. It is, I grew up in Missouri, and comparing the rural highway system of Missouri to Arizona, there are frankly not very many rural highways in Arizona, and it is to go from one rural community to another is often, it takes you twice as long as it should. How do we deal with that? Well, one idea that I have thrown out in the past that I think deserves consideration, they would have to change federal law to allow it though, is using prison labor to help construction in highways. It's a cost-saving, effective way. It's been done for years. Federal law is in the way, but if we have a governor who's an advocate and wants to get these things done, where there's a will, there's a way.
Thank you. Mr. Riggs, what factor would you consider in evaluating proposals to accelerate infrastructure development?
Well, first of all, we have to stop the sweep or diversion of state gas tax monies. These are the monies that you pay into HERF, the Highway User Revenue Fund, when you gas up at the pumps. Most of our major transportation infrastructure projects are federally funded, but they all require a state and local match. So we have to protect those funds for their intended purpose. Secondly, we as a state, believe it or not, have an aggregate debt limit, a borrowing limit of $350,000. That's an original constitutional provision dating back 102 years. That is ridiculous for a state and an economy of our size. That has to be amended to allow a prudent borrowing level so that the state can use its full faith and credit, go out in the capital and bond markets and borrow for infrastructure projects that will have a useful life of 50 to 100 years and will be used by and should be paid for generations of taxpayers. Lastly, I have called for the creation of a state infrastructure investment bank where we use a little bit of state funding, state taxpayer funding, to leverage and secure a large amount of private sector capital investment for our major infrastructure projects, including wastewater treatment and reclamation, which is the future of water in Arizona.
When we were growing GoDaddy, we couldn't figure out why everybody wasn't buying from us. And we figured out that everybody wasn't buying from us because not everybody knew who we were. So we decided to advertise at the Super Bowl. And before we did that, we decided that we wanted to have our infrastructure stable enough that if all 90 million people who came to the Super Bowl came to our website at the exact same time, our website wouldn't go down. We doubled our infrastructure. It cost us an enormous amount of money. Here were the factors we used to decide to do it. 1, if you spend money, are you going to make money? 2, if you do it, are you going to create jobs? 3, are you going to build awareness and branding and marketing and actually define your message? 4, what is your goal and are you willing to spend the money to get there? Those are the factors that you determine when you're building your infrastructure. And I will point out, our website didn't go down, unlike healthcare.gov.
Our next question. What is your plan as it relates to working with the legislature to ensure your priorities are implemented? Please be specific in how your methods will distinguish you from the other candidates and how that will ensure your success. Mr. Riggs, you're first. You have 2 minutes, sir.
Well, I very much appreciate that question. As the only candidate for governor who's had the honor or privilege of serving in the United States Congress, the highest legislative body in our land, my 3 terms, 6 years in Congress taught me that Congress, of course, as the legislative branch of government, is the co-equal partner of the executive branch. We were able to balance the budget, fundamentally reform welfare, as I mentioned earlier, with a Democratic president, Bill Clinton, in the White House. So I understand the legislative and executive branches of government have to be co-equal partners, number 1. Number 2, I've got to be honest with you folks, this is going to sound very partisan, but I won't do what this governor did in passing Medicaid expansion under Obamacare. A Republican governor is the de facto head of the state Republican Party. You simply cannot take a page, if I can put it this way, I'm really getting partisan and I apologize, out of Janet Napolitano's playbook and line up all Democrats in lockstep with behind you and then peel off a handful of Republican votes to pass something as sweeping and onerous as Medicaid expansion, which, by the way, results in an immediate legal challenge by the Goldwater Institute that 30-some-odd Republican members of the state legislature joined, saying that basically that legislation was unconstitutional because it did not meet the voter mandate for a supermajority vote, 2/3 vote, to raise any new taxes, fees, levies, or assessments. So I'm going to work very carefully with the legislature. I'm going to let them know that I consider them to be my partners, my colleagues, that I'll have an open door to members of both parties, both sides of the aisle, have my cell phone so that they can reach me. Because at the end of the day, I want to be a visible, accessible governor. I won't hide out. I represented the congressional district was 450 miles long from one end to the other. It was mostly rural and suburban communities. And I was constantly out in those communities conducting hundreds of town hall meetings because I thought it was my obligation as a servant leader who wants to serve the people to hold myself accountable to them in what better way than to go before the people and conduct town hall meetings and put myself right there on the line.
Mr. Bennett, what is your plans in relation to working with the legislature to ensure your priorities are implemented? Please be specific on how your methods will distinguish you from the other candidates and how that will ensure your success. 1 minute.
Well, as the one of the 6, or 5 that's here tonight, one of the 6 that has worked in the legislative process, I believe that's going to be a huge advantage going into a legislative session. The way we did that as Senate President is I built relationships with all of the other 29 state senators. If I am lucky enough to be elected in November, I will begin immediately to build relationships with the 90 state legislators. I think influence comes from relationships where people can learn how to trust you. When I was Senate President, we had that divided government. Democrat governor, Republican-led legislature. We had to find ways to bring people together. So I would meet every week with the legislative leadership of the Democrats and the Republicans in the Senate to make sure that we were working together to find win-win solutions. And during that time, as Frank kind of alluded to, sometimes everybody wants to just, how do I get to 16 votes in the Senate? The budgets that we passed during the 4 years I was Senate President were not only passed with the majority of my own caucus, but also a majority of the Democratic caucus members as well, working together.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, what is your plans in relation to working with the legislature to ensure your priorities are implemented? 1 minute.
You know, the governor and the legislature have to work together, and there's a natural friction, and there should be, between the branches of the government. And I rely on what I've been successful to do as a leader, as a mayor, bringing people together. This is not about me, this is about we. This is not even as governor, this is a joint effort, which is why I was able to bring mayors from around the state together to endorse my candidacy, including mayors right here in the East Valley, Mayor John Lewis, Jay Tibshraeny, Gail Barr, and Jonathan Swalwell. These are communities that historically have had friction. But we got together and we decided on what our joint objectives are. We worked together on solutions. That was why I was able to become elected president of the U.S. Conference of Mayors, even though Republicans only make up 1/3 of that membership and Democrats 2/3. The ability to bring people together, to define common goals, to define common objectives, and then to recognize that their success and my success are really intertwined. This is about team building. This is about building common goals. This is about working toward common visions. If we set a vision, and then we talk about that, I have shown that I can do that. I can turn me into we, and we will do the same thing with the legislature.
Thank you. Mr. Jones, what is your plan as it relates to working with the legislature to ensure your priorities are implemented?
I can only tell you what I've done in the past, and that is prologue for the future. With all due respect to my distinguished colleagues who've been in the legislature, I would submit to you it's actually a lot different to frame a policy agenda and cast a vision and build coalitions when you're not in that legislative body. Something that I was able to do, to my great good fortune, very, very successfully at GoDaddy. Over the course of about 10 years, I was able to put in place by leading the charge of a framework of policy that now governs the internet. And I did it by building coalitions of people, by finding things about which people could agree, setting an agenda and setting up a vision and saying, this is where we're going to go. We have 100 days in our legislative session, theoretically. It's not that long. You get the people together in the leadership. You say, this is where we are today. This is where we want to go in the future. Together, we are going to do this. It's how I ended up with legislation co-sponsored by Dianne Feinstein and Orrin Hatch. They don't really like each other that much, but they co-sponsored a bill, same as Hillary Clinton and John McCain and other groups of people that I put together. You just got to bring people together with leadership.
What is your plan as it relates to working with the legislature to ensure your priorities are implemented?
Well, it certainly is helpful to share fundamentally the same philosophy as the leaders of the legislature and most members of the legislature. I'm a conservative Republican, and the Republican Party is predominantly a conservative party, and so I would come at it from that advantage. We would share the same basic view of government, And that obviously is helpful. And in my case, I have a track record of actually working as an outside executive branch official with the legislature to pass laws. We did that in the realm of illegal immigration. We passed the human smuggling law, the employer sanctions law, the day laborer law. We had a great deal of success in that area. We also did in the area of criminal justice. I helped lead the fight to change the spousal rape law so that rape was no longer considered quote-unquote privilege within the context of marriage. And I was actually praised by advocates of domestic violence reform and reform laws for that reason. We also cracked down in other areas related to criminal justice. I have a proven track record and I'm proud of that.
Thank you. Mr. Riggs, you have 1 minute to summarize.
With all due respect to those who have written or have acted as lobbyists, but never held elective office, never had to cast a single legislative vote, there's a vast difference between that experience and actually serving in elective office where you're accountable for your voting record. As a member of Congress, we had to say, don't listen to what they say, look at what they do. Look at their actual voting record. So my bonus to the legislators, I've already made it, is here's my cell phone. You'll have my number. You can always reach me. As a United States Congressman, true story, I was in the phone book. And that's, again, part of what I feel means being accountable to the people. Every now and then I'd actually get a phone call and there'd be a sort of a pregnant pause and I'd say, yes, this is he. And then I'd listen and talk because, again, my responsibility is to be accountable to the people. One thing that we did in the 104th Congress is the contract with America. I was one of the architects and co-signers of that document, and I want to put forward a contract with Arizona so that all Arizonans are aware of what our legislative priorities will be and can accordingly hold us accountable.
Thank you. We're at the point now where we will have each candidate come to the podium for 2 minutes to make their closing remarks. Again, this order has been predetermined for a random drawing. Our first candidate to speak will be Mr. Smith.
It's official. Thank you once again for being here. As you heard tonight, you have really, on this case, we count 5 people who have a wide variety of experiences. They have ideas. We're conservative, so in many ways we agree on our principles and our philosophies. But there are many challenges the state faces, significant challenges. And the question is, maybe not someone who agrees totally on every issue, but who can lead? This is a leadership issue. The things we are talking about are not going to be solved tomorrow, but they're really going to be solved over the next 1 year, 5 years, and they're going to determine over the next generation what happens. That's why this election is so important. I'm running because I looked at my granddaughter. She's now almost 10 years old. And I looked at her and said, what is the state she's going to grow up in? What are the things that are going to attract her to stay here in Arizona? What are the opportunities she's going to have? And I have a vision. I have a vision that she'll grow up in a school system that is ranked in the top third, not the bottom third. I have a vision she'll go to a higher education that are nationally and internationally recognized far above where they are today. I have a vision that she'll be able to choose the career she wants, whether it be college related or not. Or she'll be able to choose to not do a career, and she'll be able to choose to keep her family here and grow her family. I have a vision that she'll have water that will be assured. She'll grow in safe forests that have been thinned, that have been managed. And I have a vision that her children will have a future too. This is about leadership. We don't know what the specific issues will be 1 year, 5 years, 10 years from now, but we do know that strong leaders take the issues as they come and look at them in the context of generations, not just of today, but as tomorrow and the next year and the next generation. I have a proven track record of accomplishment. I have proven as a leader in business and in government that I can build a better community. I now invite you to join with me, because this is a together activity. This is about us to build a better Arizona. VoteScottSmith.com, VoteScottSmith.com. I would love your support. Thank you very much.
Our next candidate for final closing thoughts, Mr. Riggs.
Come on over. Mike. Thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. It's been great to join you. I will tell you that
tonight, like on so many prior occasions, you just kind of wish you could stretch those answers a little bit more to get into a little bit more detail. I think you deserve that. But I very much appreciate, again, this opportunity, especially appreciate the young people that are here tonight showing their interest in government and trying to make our system of participatory democracy work. I'm Frank Riggs, and I am running for governor because we need a tested, trusted, and proven leader at the helm. I've spent the last 16 years literally building more school choice and educational opportunity in Arizona and across the country, joking all the while that I was a recovering politician. But I love Arizona, my wife's home state, now the home state to our kids and grandkids, and I'm setting out to make a real difference by honestly and courageously addressing the challenges that we face. This isn't about my vaunting or faulting, I guess would be the right term, ambition or my ego. I have no desire to go back into politics for a long-term career or to seek another elective office. I'm doing this to give back to my state because, again, we need a proven leader at the helm. I have been tested, I've been trusted, I'm vetted. I cast over 3,000 votes as a member of Congress. A voting record, by the way, that consisted of my first votes in the first Persian Gulf War resolutions, my last votes on the articles of impeachment against Bill Clinton. 2 months, by the way, after he signed into law my bill creating a limited federal grant program for public charter schools, which were just in their infancy. A voting record that earned me the highest ratings and endorsements of National Right to Life for my pro-life, pro-family voting record, and from the NRA for my pro-Second Amendment voting record. I will be the strong leader that our state needs. I will put your interests, the interests of the people first. I will always put principle over politics if you give me that extraordinary opportunity and privilege. Frank Riggs, Riggs4FORAZGov.com. Thank you again.
Ms. Jones, you're next for some closing thoughts.
Hi, I'm Christine Jones, and I appreciate you guys being here tonight. Thank you very much for moderating and for hosting us. It is a journey that we're on, and I respect these gentlemen. You know, when you sign up to do this, it's a tough game. You paint a target on your back, you invite people to attack you, and then they do. And it strikes me that even with all of the almost 50 years of collective office experience of my opponents, we still have a vacuum. And when Governor Brewer leaves, it's going to be an even bigger vacuum. And it needs to be filled by a fearless, determined, proven leader. That's why I'm running for governor. That's why I came out of my private life as a private citizen to run for this office. And I would love to have your support. I hope you vote for me. I hope you vote for me. And then I hope you go find 2 people who weren't otherwise going to vote and get them to vote too, for me. Because in this state, less than 10% of the population are going to pick the next governor. And to the people who were in the 18 to 35-year-old category in the room in the last presidential election, less than 8% of you and your peers voted. It's a bad statistic. So join me, and together, let's make Arizona, among the grand galaxy of states in these United States, the brightest star in the Union. Thanks for having me.
Mr. Bennett, you're next. 2 minutes for some closing thoughts.
Thank you for coming this evening. I'm running for governor because I want to help people in Arizona have a better life. I'm running for governor for people like Steve Trail. Steve is a principal at a South Tucson elementary school. When he took over 5 or 6 years ago, only 20% of the kids could read and write at grade level. And with some resources that have been provided through the budgeting that we had done 5 or 6 years ago, he got some help into the classroom, the teachers, teacher assistants. Now they have almost 75%. of the students in that school, reading and writing at grade level. Running for Rod Comstock, who lost his job because of an accident and has not been able to find them. And I've stopped several times under the bridge in 19th and I-10 to help him find a place where he can get back on his feet. It's not a government program, it's growing the economy so that he can get a job and support himself and his family. It's for Julianne Ashcraft, who grew up with my daughter, a childhood friend, and yet lost her husband Andrew in the Yarnell fire just about a year ago. So it's taking care of our forests and doing things for our first responders. I'm very proud to have the endorsement of 4 statewide law enforcement associations: the Fraternal Order of Police, the correctional officers who work in our prisons, the Highway Patrolmen's Association, and the Arizona Conference of Police and Sheriffs. Over 25,000 men and women who put their lives on the line for us every day have endorsed me for governor because they can remember back to a time when we were in the Senate and I was Senate President, that we had some tough budget times and we had to say we can't do much, but when we can, we will. And then when the budgets got better and we grew our economy, we gave them the largest pay raise in the history of the state for state employees. We can build a stronger Arizona. I invite you to join me, BennettArizona.com. Ken Bennett, thank you very much for coming today.
2 minutes for some final thoughts.
Well, thank you very much again for the opportunity to share with you my vision for Arizona. You know, Arizona is it's really one of the great places on earth in which to live. If you think about it, I mean, that's why my wife and I moved here 23 years ago. That's why so many of us moved here. And it's because Arizona has unique features, unique advantages. But we also have unique challenges. And we have to be honest about those, and we have to deal with those so that our future will continue to be bright and limitless. We have to deal with our border situation. That is a unique challenge that Arizona faces, and we need to be honest about it, and we need to have a tough leader who will deal with it decisively before it is too late, before we go the road of other states, other communities that cannot pay their bills, that are dissolving in many ways. We have to be honest about the situation, and that is why I come back to this issue, which is the issue that dwarfs all others, because you've heard us address a variety of topics tonight, and they are certainly important topics, and I think you got some cogent answers and a wide variety of opinions on how to address those issues. But in all candor, all of that is meaningless if we do not secure our border, because we will not be able to pay our bills, and we can talk about all these things, but it's just whistling in the wind. We have to get somebody who will deal with our border situation, who will stop illegal immigration, and I am the one guy who has done it. And it is not easy, let me tell you. To stop illegal immigration requires taking on the entire political, legal, and media establishment for years, and being willing to take the hits that come from that for your state and for your country. That is what I offer. That is what I will do as governor. I ask you for your vote. Thank you again for your time, for coming tonight. God bless you.
Thank you to the candidates and all of you. On behalf of the East Valley Chambers of Commerce Alliance, we'd like to thank everybody for attending. Thank the Chandler-Gilbert Community College for hosting us this evening. Please join us in the lobby to spend a little additional time with the candidates. Thank you very much.